Hello everyone, welcome to another interesting and informative session of the Analyst brought to you by Vajiram and Ravi. In today's session, we'll discuss 7 important articles as featured in the Hindu and Indian Express for your comprehensive understanding of the current affairs explained to you in the easiest language possible. The topics are as follows. From your analysis section, in the first topic, we'll try to assess the issue of poverty prevailing in the rural region and the development which has been achieved under the National Rural Livelihood Mission. Then, in the second topic, we'll try to assess the issue of shortage of critical minerals in our country and what are the steps which has been taken by the government of India. Then, from a prelims pointer section, we'll take up 5 news where we'll not only try to simplify the news for you, but also provide you the much important value addition, keeping in mind the approaching prelims 2026, which will help you to eliminate some very important statements in the prelims examination and solve some question. So, stay tuned. Where the lead editorial today highlights that how the development which India has achieved under the National Rural Livelihood Mission is actually shaping the South to South cooperation by actually circulating institutional practices, where to actually eradicate the poverty which was prevailing in our rural areas. India not only adopted from some global best practices which we are going to discuss further, but also now, because of the development which we have achieved under the National Rural Livelihood Mission, we are also providing a kind of a template for other developing nations if they basically want to take the same path of poverty eradication in their rural areas. The issue, which forms an important component of your GS1 paper under the larger theme of issue of poverty and poverty elimination. So let's first try to understand the context of the news. The news says that when India launched the National Rural Livelihood Mission in which year? 2011. Under which ministry? Ministry of Rural Development. We did so with an ambitious objective to tackle the multi-dimensional poverty. And the idea was to enable the rural households to access gainful employment and sustainable livelihood through various initiatives which were going to promote self-employment, financial inclusion, and providing skill set to the rural population. So as per the today's article, because of this initiative of National Rural Livelihood Mission, India was significantly able to decline its multi-dimensional poverty which was basically prevailing in the rural areas. And that is something which is also evident from the data which has been provided to us by the Multi-Dimensional Poverty Index, which is released by the United Nations Development Programme. And here the poverty which is prevailing, or let's say for example impacting any significant region, is actually calculated on 3 important parameters, that is health, education and living standards. So for example, if we are trying to assess the poverty which is prevailing in one specific village, we are basically going to assess the households on these 3 parameters. The parameters also have their own subcomponents. For example, under health, we are going to check the nutrition level as well as the child mortality rate which is prevailing in that village. Under education, we'll see the years of schooling which has been achieved by the population as well as the school attendance. Under the living standards, there are several components, like for example, whether the household has access to cooking fuel. So let's say for example, right now, our country is actually facing the shortage of LPG cylinder. So a lot of such households might not be having regular access to cooking fuel. Thus, don't you think that now, if another indices is going to be calculated by UNDP, the Multidimensional Poverty Index, our ranking is actually going to decline. It is going to impact our ranking. Second, the level of sanitation, the drinking water and the quality of it, the regular supply of electricity, the housing, whether it is available or not, and several basic assets. By the calculation of all of these parameters, the Multidimensional Poverty Index, which was released by UNDP, it said that in the year of 2023, approximately 18% of India's population, or 230 million people, were facing multidimensional poverty. However, keep this in mind that in the year 2005 and 6, the rate was 55%. So we were able to almost bring out 37% of the population from the bracket of multidimensional poverty. And thanks to this National Rural Livelihood Mission, just look that in the year of 2011, the people who are facing multidimensional poverty in the rural areas was 26%, and how that significantly declined to 15% by the year of 2023. And that is also the claim by the today's editorial. However, it also does not paint a complete rainbow picture for the rural economy. And for that purpose, we are going to assess the Economic Survey 2026, according to which in year of 2024 to 2025, almost 65 to 66% of our total population, that would amount to 90 crore people, still live in rural India, where 55 to 60% of the rural population is engaged in various agriculture allied service sector or agriculture allied manufacturing sector or in agriculture. If we talk about the number of farmers who are directly involved in the cultivation activities, that amounts to almost 15% of the workforce in the rural India. Now, let's refer to try to assess the earning which is being incurred by these farmers on monthly basis. If you look to the data which has been provided to us by the NABARD, National Bank for the Agriculture and Rural Development, according to that, the average monthly income of these farmers amount to approximately 10,218 rupees on average basis. So keep this in mind that there would be large scale farmers who are having large scale agriculture land holding, and thus their earning might be also being included in calculation of this average monthly income. So now let's try to compare this data by the data which has been provided to us by the World Bank, where World Bank says that in our country in the year of 2024-2025, almost 5.3% of the population still actually faces extreme poverty. And what is the definition of extreme poverty which has been given by the World Bank? So according to the World Bank, any person who is earning less than $3 per day would amount to be considered as the person who is facing extreme poverty. If we go to the purchasing power parity and we try to calculate this income today, this might come around 300 to 400 rupees per day. Don't you think that a large scale farmers whose average monthly income is actually less than this if we multiply this by 30 and calculate it on the basis of monthly income? And thus almost two-thirds of India's poor people, they actually reside in these rural areas itself, and 60 to 70% of the rural population, they earn less than 1 lakh rupees per annum. The rural unemployment rate stood at approximately 4.2%. So yes, indeed, as per the multidimensional poverty index, we have brought a significant amount of population in the rural areas out from the basket of poverty. However, the picture is not all rainbow as well. There still exists a significant amount of people who are living in the rural areas who are deprived of basic livelihood, any kind of meaningful jobs, as well as they are also facing this issue of extreme poverty. The question which shall arise in your mind is, what are the causes of this paradox of plenty or the existence of rural poverty even in the year of 2025? The first and foremost is the low agriculture productivity, where still a large amount of population depends upon agriculture. For example, agriculture sector employs 46% of our workforce. However, the agriculture sector in our country still suffers from the very fundamental issues. Like for example, still a large number of farmers, they follow the traditional method of cultivation. Large number of farmers actually have very small land holdings. And these two factors basically contribute to less mechanization and thus less agriculture output, which is evident from the data that even though 46% of our total workforce of our country is involved in the agriculture sector, its contribution to GDP stands at 14 to 16% only. Also, look at the data for the third quarter of 2025, according to which the nominal gross value addition, which was done by this primary sector or agriculture sector, was a meager 14%. Now, two interpretations can be drawn from this. First, large number of people are actually contributing to less number of gross value addition. Thus, don't you think there exists the issue of disguised unemployment in agriculture, where the marginal productivity of this primary sector is either zero or negligible, thanks to this issue of disguised unemployment? The second is that if a large number of population is involved in less number of gross value addition, don't you think that the less number of population which is involved in the sectors like, for example, service sector or manufacturing sector, they are actually producing more number of gross value addition, and thus their income level is also significantly higher than people who are involved in agriculture and residing in the rural areas. Thus, don't you think there exists the issue of wage disparity in the rural areas, leading to large scale economic inequality? To understand this in a simple manner, just imagine that a family has two brothers. One brother who, let's say for example, is a doctor and is residing in urban areas and thus working in service sector. One brother who is basically a farmer and resides in the rural areas. Now you make a guess that the offspring of which of these two brothers will have better access to nutritious food, better access to good healthcare infrastructure, better access to good quality education, and a lot of skill infrastructure for the holistic development of the offspring. And thus, the offspring of which of these two brothers will have access to good quality jobs, meaningful jobs in the future, thanks to all these factors. So don't you think over the generation, this economic inequality which exists is actually going to significantly grow? And thus, this is the issue of the vicious cycle of poverty, which is actually further widened by the unequal distribution of assets of land and capital which exist. For example, majority of these farmers are nothing but agricultural laborers, agricultural tenants, or the farmers who have a meager land holding of less than 2 hectares. Just look at the data which was provided to us by the agriculture census of 2015-16, according to which 69% of the farmers were marginal, less than having 1 hectare of land, and 18% of them were categorized as small, having less than 2 hectares of land. So almost 87% of the farmers in our country are nothing but small and marginal farmers as per the agriculture census of 2015-16. So that is a major issue, where they have unequal distribution of assets of land and capital, leading to further aggravating the issue of vicious cycle of poverty, where not only the farmer in the current generation but their offspring in the future generation, they accumulate low human capital and thus faces the issue of educational and health deficit, the poverty which is passed from one generation to another. Just look at the India skill reports of 2024, according to which 21% of the youth in our country aged between the years of 15 to 29 years had received vocational training, the training which was adequate enough to make them employable in the industries. Out of this 21%, the number of people who had received a good quality formal vocational training was meager 4.4%. And thus, let's say for example, even if there were 100 people, 100 students who were the part of the college programs in urban and rural areas, only 51% of them were considered as employable by the industries. The report which also highlighted that how there exists 60 to 70% of the skill gap when it comes to the machine learning engineer, data scientist, etc. The jobs which are going to become more important in the future with the age of technology. How, especially in the rural areas, there exists the lack of artificial intelligence integration in their learning methods and training. Just make another guess that this skill gap which exists, how much percentage of this would actually being contributed by those people who are residing in rural areas, receiving their education in the primary schools of the government, attending some government school and colleges in the region of rural areas. Do you think that these people are going to have adequate opportunity to get jobs in the future age, in the age of technology? So that is another issue, the accumulation of low human capital. Another major issue which was actually highlighted by Karl Marx was that how over a period of time there is going to take place a large scale migration from rural to urban areas, where these people who are facing low human capital in the current generation, they would obviously not want the same future for their children, for their offspring, right? The biggest irony of our country is that no farmer dreams to make their kids farm, a kind of a farmer in the future. So the outward migration which is taking place from the rural areas to the urban areas for better lifestyle, to have better social capital, to actually have better job opportunities. Basically, earlier, the rural region, which was basically kind of guided by the large scale families who used to indulge in agriculture, now this structure is significantly changing, leading to the rise of nuclear families in the rural areas. Thus, the overall agriculture productivity has significantly declined, and with less incentive in the rural areas, the industries has also kind of not gone or not penetrated into the rural areas that much. If they have cheap labor available in the urban areas itself, why they would like to create industries in these rural areas? Thus, these farmers who are facing all of these issues were termed as sack of potatoes by the Karl Marx, where they do not have any social cohesion, where they cannot act as a significant pressure group on the government to take some very important initiatives for them, and thus they are limited as nothing but a individual potato in a complete sack. The sack of potato phenomena by the Karl Marx. Further, further this rural area faces the issue of slow rate of industrialization, and there are several factors for that. Why such less industrialization? So let's say, for example, imagine now yourself as a capitalist, as an industrialist. You have two options: either to have heavy investment in the rural area, but in rural areas there exists poor infrastructure, absence of reliable electricity, logistic, internet penetration, skilled labor is not there. So don't you think your input cost is going to significantly increase with high transaction cost? In comparison to that, in urban areas, you have good logistic, good amount of national highways, rural roads, your various kind of logistic infrastructure, let's say for example, dedicated freight corridors. You have regular supply of cheap and skilled labor. Many of them have migrated from the rural areas only. You have good supply of electricity here. So why you are going to take the risk and make that investment in the rural areas at all? Further, these rural areas, they actually face the issue of lack of capital and credit access. Even today, almost 60 to 70% of the farmers actually rely on informal source of credit. Further, the issue of unskilled or semi-skilled workforce. And thus, as per the Center for Monitoring Indian Economy, industrial sector employs 12 to 15% of the rural workforce. That's all. As well as the rural industry share in the overall GDP is nothing but 25 to 30% of the total industrial output. And thus, there is taking place less industrialization when it comes to rural areas. Now, look at this data. The actual data for poverty decline in India after 2011. The GDP growth rate from 2011 to 23 on average for 10 to 11 years has been only 5.7%, and thus there has been a slower decline in the poverty as it could have been ideally. The wage rates in rural India, the annual wage rate growth has actually fell by 2.3% per year in comparison to urban areas, as well as 68 million workers has actually been added in the agriculture sector since the year of 2017-18. So while all of these issues were prevailing in the rural areas, our government basically brought this initiative of National Rural Livelihood Mission, which basically work on these parameters, which you guys can actually add as a kind of a +1 marks for a diagram which you guys can add in your answer. So what is the idea? Three important pillars are there. First, innovation shall be provided. Second, financial and capital services shall be provided, as well as the market linkages shall be established with the rural areas and the various markets of the country. For that purpose, technology productivity has to be increased, as well as the access to entitlements and last mile delivery of services by the government, where the government is providing dedicated support on the institutional level by various professionals, learning platforms, as well as trying to increase the human and social capitals through various leaders, community resource planning committees, para-professionals, etc., to build a enabling environment on partnership and convergence, where the government is trying to create self-help groups, create federations and livelihood collectives to actually increase the aggregating and the federation of the poor, women, small and the marginal farmers, including having impetus on SC and STs. So let's try to see the salient features of the scheme. First is universal social mobilization under the Sustainable Development Goal 1 itself, which aims to eradicate poverty. The government has tried to organize the rural poor into various self-help groups, and thus, as per the data given in the today's editorial, more than 10 crore plus women has been mobilized into 90 plus lakh of self-help groups. Then the government has tried to provide formal credit to them. Let's say, for example, if you are trying to create a startup in the rural area, but then you do not have access to the capital, the government is saying no problem, we are going to provide for financial inclusion as well as credit linkages to you. And thus bank linkages has been provided for affordable credit, formal credit. More than 50 million women have access bank credit. Banking correspondents are present in 60% of the local government. 20 million plus women are earning now more than 1 lakh of income in the rural areas as per the today's editorial. Then the government is also trying to diversify the livelihood, that you should not only be relying on the agriculture and the allied sectors. Rather, promotion of micro enterprises is being done under NRLM in the rural areas. The government has created various value chain creation for more than 1 crore farmers. And the impetus is also to provide industrial level of skilling under the Gramin Kaushal Yojana, where more than 15 lakh youth has been trained as per the government data. So, while these steps are already under the function, under the National Rural Livelihood Mission, what can be the ideal way forward? The first and foremost is that, let's say for example, there is a farmer who has produced 1 kg of rice, which has, let's say, a MRP of 100 rupees. But if adequate processing of the food is provided, right, the same rice will transition into some great product and might be being exported by some company for more than 500 rupees. So many of the time the farmers, they do not get their due credit or their actual income which shall be realized by the farmers. For example, let's say there is a apple farmer of Himachal Pradesh. The same apple which you people purchase for 100 rupees, do you know what is the exact amount for 1 kg which is actually goes to the pocket of the apple farmer in Himachal Pradesh? That is a meager 14 rupees, 14% of the actual MRP. So the government is trying to substantiate their income so that at least they have income for other purposes. Let's say they are not only reliant on their meager income of agriculture. So along with the market support price, the government has also brought direct benefit transfer under Kisan Samman Nidhi to substantiate the income of the farmers, where government is providing 2000 rupees every 4 months and the 6000 rupees as a direct benefit transfer to the farmers. Then the government is also trying to incentivize the job creation in the rural areas. In the budget 2023, the government launched Agriculture Accelerator Fund, under which the government is incentivizing and promoting a startup specifically in the rural areas and for the rural problems. So let's say for example, under the PM Kusum scheme, the government is trying to kind of bring the solar pumps, right? So let's say for example, if there is a company in the rural area and that company would take the initiative of making these photovoltaic solar panels, the government will incentivize that under Agriculture Accelerator Fund. The idea shall be that we should try to target the sunrise sector to actually create such enough credit linkages as well as farmer to market linkages, especially in the food and the processing industry. So very recently your CDS exam was conducted and the UPSC asked the same question: which of the following can be considered as a sunrise sector? The answer was food processing industry as well as for the solar power generation. Then to further scale our demographic dividend, especially in the rural areas, under the schemes like, for example, Rural Self-Employment and Training Institute. And then to promote such women-led self-help groups, the ideal can be the Kudumshri model of the Kerala. For example, you guys might have heard about a village called as Kumbhalingi in Kerala, which is also considered as the first model tourism village in the country, where, let's say for example, if there are foreigner women who are coming to our country, so they always have this safety concern. So to actually placate that, the majority of the tourist activity in the Kumbhalingi village is actually provided by the women. So they are running, let's say for example, the homestays, they are providing them home cooked foods, they are the one who are basically, driving the boats, taking them to the riverine sites and various scenic locations, right? So these kind of self-help groups, majorly led by women, can also become a game changer to actually create more employment and more earning opportunities in the rural areas. For that purpose, we can also adopt some global best practices. For example, the Grameen Bank model of Bangladesh, which specifically targeted microcrediting of the rural women to create some various entrepreneurship opportunities as well as startups. Or for example, the township and the village enterprise of China, where the major impetus was given on creation of rural industries, and China ended up creating more than 135 million job opportunities in the span of 5 years. Or one village, one product of Japan, where for example each and every village specializes in one specific product. So let's say for example there is a village which is famous for its textile, there is one village which is very famous for its cuisine, as well as the Samul Undong movement of South Korea, where the impetus was given for community-driven skilling of the youth, community-driven infrastructure creation in the rural areas. So these can be some ideal global based practices which can also act as a model for us, while our national rural livelihood mission itself act as a model for various developing countries in the region of South, the global South, right? The South to South cooperation, and thus enhancing that as well. Keep this in your mind while you are attempting this question, and we move forward to the next news, where the article highlights the issue of geopolitical dimension of the mineral supply chains, citing that how global supply networks for the critical minerals are highly concentrated and increasingly subject to various kind of export controls. The issue which forms an important component of your GS3 paper under the larger theme of energy security. So first and foremost, what is the context of the news? India's talk with Zambia over critical mineral mining have actually stalled amid a lack of assurances from Zambia on the mining rights. India last year received an allocation of 9,000 km square to explore cobalt in the region of Zambia, which is cobalt, which is a key component in batteries for electric vehicles and mobile phones, as well as copper, which is widely used in power generation, electronics, and construction. So we basically dispatched a team of geologists last year who have since returned with sample of minerals including cobalt and copper. However, the exploration in Zambia was set to run for 3 years, after which India had planned to invite private sector companies to participate, subject to securing the mining rights. However, Zambia, creating a kind of an export control, has now basically stalled this entire exploration exercise. So the first question which shall arise in your mind is, what are these critical minerals? Critical minerals are basically natural reserves. Natural reserves where they basically act as a very important raw material for the industrial level manufacturing of various kind of components, equipments, as well as machinery. For example, you guys might be watching this lecture on your laptop, and the laptop which is basically functioning on various kind of semiconductors or batteries, etc. For the manufacturing of which you require various kind of critical minerals, like for example germanium, gallium, silicon, etc. So basically these critical minerals are essential for not only the various kind of industrial level output to actually increase significantly our manufacturing and thus also create employment in our country. Just look at the use of these critical minerals in various key industries, like for example neodymium and dysprosium, which basically are high strength magnets and they are usable for motors in drones, guidance system in missiles and radars, titanium, strong and lightweight metal for aircraft, engine and armor, tungsten, which is highly used in armor piercing projectiles due to its high density, cobalt, lithium and nickel, crucial for advanced batteries powering electronics, electric vehicles as well as military hardware. The copper, which is essential for wiring, electronics, electromagnetic protection in ships and aircrafts, and gallium and germanium, which are basically used as semiconductors for various kind of electronic warfare systems. So once we have established the kind of the paramount importance which these critical minerals have for our industries, let's try to assess their importance for our security and sovereignty of the country as well. To actually establish this context, we can basically utilize Hoffman's analysis about the future mode of warfare, which would be excessively guided by technology. So, for example, as per the Hoffman's analysis, the future warfare is going to be established on three important pillars. The first is going to be precision technology, like for example, the guided missiles which are currently being utilized in the Iran-USA war. The second is going to be the cyber warfare, and the third is going to be media manipulation. All of these three components were vividly visible during the Operation Sindoor, which was actually launched by the government of India in response to the Pahalgam attack by the terrorists which were sheltered by Pakistan. Now look at this article, the essential minerals for the robust defense ecosystem, that how India needs to be self-sufficient in the production of these critical minerals, metals and rare earth to actually significantly increase our indigenous defense production, something which we have also envisaged under the defense acquisition policy of 2020. Now you guys can see that how India's air defense system is actually intercepting an aerial object during the suspected drone attack from the Pakistan. Now, to create such drones, you require what? Critical minerals, copper, carbon fiber, aluminium, plastic, lithium ion and silicon to create this one drone. Don't you think increasing production as well as availability of this critical mineral is actually very important for strengthening our indigenous defense capability? Second, not only that, it is also going to be a pillar for our energy security as well as to achieve our national goals, some very important national goals which we have taken on the international platforms. Like for example, under our Panchamrit target, which we adopted in the COP 2026, we basically set up an ambitious target for ourselves. We said that by the year of 2030, we are going to produce 500 gigawatt of renewable energy by the year of 2030. To achieve that, our government said, let's try to put impetus on the solar energy sector, and thus brought a scheme called as Pradhan Mantri Surya Ghar Muft Bijli Yojana, under which the government is basically envisaging to install 1 crore solar photovoltaic solar rooftop panels in the residential sector by the year of 2027. The same statement which also appeared in your prelims 2025 paper, Pradhan Mantri Surya Ghar Muft Bijli Yojana. Now, to create this photovoltaic solar panels, you basically require a critical mineral, that is silicon diode. Silicon diode is basically the component which actually captures the photon-based solar energy and converts it into electric energy. So don't you think even to achieve energy security, to achieve these national level targets or these ambitious schemes which we are launching, we should have adequate resources of critical minerals in our country? Now, look at the Global Critical Mineral Outlook 2024 report, according to which such demand of critical minerals like for example lithium has going to increase almost by 30% in 2023 itself. Nickel, cobalt, graphite, various such rare earth minerals, they are actually facing a demand growth of more than 8 to 15% per annum. The aggregate value of this critical mineral industry in our country is actually pegged at $325 billion. So a follow-up question can be, how much self-sufficient India is when it comes to the production and the procurement of these raw materials? For that purpose, let's look at the data provided to us by the Ministry of Mines, according to which in our country there exist more than 1,319 mines. 545 of them are metallic in the nature and 774 of them are non-metallic. India's mining GDP currently stands at 82,680 crore and it ends up providing employment to 11 million people. Also, remember India's global standing for the upcoming prelims examination. We rank second when it comes to the production of crude steel, aluminium and coal. We rank third when it comes to limestone and fourth when it comes to iron ore. What about our self-sufficiency in the critical mineral? Let's try to assess that. Let's say there is bismuth. Bismuth, which is something very important for pharmaceutical and chemicals. We are almost 85% import reliant for bismuth, 82% for lithium, which has a kind of a prerequisite importance in EV batteries and energy storage, 76% for these silicons, which we are discussing for creation of solar panels under Pradhan Mantri Surya Ghar Muft Bijli Yojana. 50% for titanium, which is very important for aerospace and defense application, and 42% for tellurium, which is required for the creation of solar voltaic solar panels and thermoelectric devices. You guys can check the import dependency which we have for various such critical minerals, and that was also highlighted by the Ministry of Mines report of 2023 published in 2024. The UPSC created a question in 2025. Keep this in mind. According to which there exist 30 such essential critical minerals, like for example bismuth, lithium, silicon, titanium, tellurium. 30 such essential critical minerals, of which there exist complete import dependent, for which we are import dependent, and we have a complete import dependency for almost 10 of such minerals. That's why we incur such huge trade deficit when it comes to China. Now, if someone knows only this one basic data, look at the question here, prelims 2025. India has joined the Mineral Security Partnership as a member, which is true. India is a resource-rich country, and all the 30 critical minerals that it has identified. The point is, even if you are unaware completely about the Ministry of Mines report 2023 and this very specific data, you are not even required to know about it. Only if you are a layman reader of the newspaper, right, or watcher of Analyst, many of the time we keep on discussing about the India's reliance on China for critical minerals. How India is endowed with 95 minerals but yet to establish a footprint in the critical minerals. Anyone can very easily assess that yes, indeed, we are not resource rich in all 30 critical minerals, and thus if we eliminate the second option, we can directly reach to the answer, that's all. This was UPSC examiner while he was creating the question in 2025. Two numbers were there waiting for you. Check. So when we compare actually that why we are so much import reliant on China, what China has done, this is where you can actually see a kind of a huge widening gap, where China in the recent years has emerged the world's largest mining nation. Keep this in mind, where it has invested almost $19.4 billion for exploration, excavation, and making these minerals industrial ready. In comparison to that, if we say that our country has also launched National Critical Mineral Mission, yes indeed, the total corpus is about 16,300 crore rupees, which would amount to approximately $2 billion, and thus it is only 10 times less than the investment which is being made by China. And thus China controls 87% of the rare earth element processing, 58% of the world's lithium refining, and 68% of silicon processing in the world. A follow-up question in your mind, why? Why we are unable to achieve the same exploration and excavation of these minerals in comparison to China? There exist some fundamental reasons which we are going to discuss. First and foremost is inadequate exploration and tapping of the reserve. To understand that, let's take up a case study of ilmenite. First and foremost, what is ilmenite? Ilmenite is nothing but an isotope of titanium dioxide. This was the exact question which UPSC asked in 2023. Keep this in mind. The mineral area is very important for our country. We have already established the strategic importance, the importance to achieve energy security, to achieve some very important international targets. And thus, it is also an area of focus for UPSC. Every year, they are asking 2 to 3 questions from this sector. So, pay attention. Ilmenite, which is an isotope of titanium dioxide. Now, again, titanium, which is of paramount importance for our aerospace and defense applications. So, this ilmenite can be extracted from igneous rock as well as metamorphic rock. Now, just use your basic NCERT class 11th knowledge, and you know that we have abundant resources of igneous and metamorphic rocks in our country, and thus India possesses 11% reserves of ilmenite which exist in the world. 11% of that. Even then, we have been unable to tap these resources, adequately explore and excavate them, and thus we keep on importing almost 50% of our titanium need and keep on paying billions of dollars for that. Second follow-up question, why there exists such inadequate exploration and reserve? So try to understand this, that these minerals are not kind of available at the bedrock or the kind of the permeable rock. Rather, they are deep-seated minerals which are found at a kind of a higher depths in the crust, and thus they involve high-risk investment in exploration and mining. To understand that, let's say we take up an area of 5 kilometers square, and we say that yes, in this area of 5 kilometers square, there is a possibility of potential reserves of lithium. Now, there exist three stages. First and foremost, there will take place exploration. That will require a huge amount of technology upgradation and machinery to actually prove that yes, indeed, potential reserves of lithium exist there. Second stage is to actually do various kind of geochemical mapping, kind of geological surveys, aerial surveys, to actually ascertain that yes, indeed, the amount of lithium reserves which are present in this 5 kilometer square area is commercially viable or not, whether they are going to incur some profit or not. Then only as a company you are going to invest in that. The third stage is to actually do a kind of a large extensive geochemical mapping, that whether this lithium is of metal grade or not, whether it can be actually utilized for the industrial purpose or not. Now let's say as a company, you took this 5 kilometer square area for the lease from the government. Then you invested, created such research team, brought international experts, put all of this technology upgradation and machinery, and the exploration took place for 3 years. After 3 years, the research team basically told you, Malik, sorry, थोड़ी सी गलती हो गई. This area is not commercially viable. Don't you think a huge amount of investment which you made is completely going into the drain? High risk investment in exploration and mining, and thus it basically such large scale investment and long gestation period of the mineral projects, it acts as kind of a detrimental for the private capital investment, lack of incentive for the private sector. We can take up the case study, which is also the discovery of 5.9 million tons of lithium deposit in Jammu and Kashmir. It was a eureka moment for the country. Everyone was like, now we are going to extract lithium from here. Till now, not one single commercially viable project has been established in Jammu and Kashmir. Why? Because these lithium reserves which you can see, they are actually found in clay deposit. And even the global technology, right, there does not exist any soundproof technology where there can be 100% extraction from such clay deposit, extraction of such critical minerals. Keep this in mind. Let's say there are 100 such projects of exploration and excavation which are launched in the world. Only one out of them actually ends up becoming commercially viable. That's why even till today, India has explored only 10% of its OGP, that is obvious geological potential. And out of this 10%, only 2% reason is something which we have mined till now. So there exist these fundamental challenges, and thus we have a huge reliance when it actually comes to China. Just look here, 97% supply of erythromycin, 86% of flat panel displays and 80% of the laptops, 82% of the solar cells and 75% of the lithium ion batteries is something which we import from China. India depends most on Chinese import for producing its own export, and thus we are importing $113 billion from China. Our export to China is a meager 14.25 billion. Thus, we are incurring a $99 billion deficit. The total trade deficit which we have, the total balance of payment crisis which we have, 35% of that actually comes from China itself. What China is doing? As per the Global Trade Research Initiative, this overwhelming dominance actually gives China a potential leverage against our country, turning our supply chain into a tool of pressure in the times of political tension. So, for example, China started saying that, you know what, even we do not have lithium ion, right? We do not have that much of reserves of lithium. We cannot export to you lithium. But do you want lithium batteries for your electric vehicles? Yes, indeed. Please start buying that from us. We do not have any option. We do not have any reserves of lithium. So we started buying lithium ion batteries from China. Now there were, let's say for example, some domestic manufacturers in our country. What they were doing? They were procuring lithium raw material. They were creating these batteries in India, and thus they could actually avail benefits under production linked incentive scheme. But now they cannot avail that. Why? Because they are actually forced to buy the batteries itself. So don't you think even the manufacturing output of our country is declining thanks to this pressure which is being created by China? So what are the steps? What has been our country's response? First, we have created CABIL. CABIL is a kind of a public sector unit which has been created by the government to actually secure overseas mineral assets, and thus we were basically trying to explore and excavate the minerals in the region of Zambia. Then, the Geological Survey of India and the Center Scientific Industrial Research Body is actually promoting the circular economy. So let's say, for example, if there is a lithium ion battery, we are basically trying to keep on recycling it so that our overall need of such battery from China is going to decline in a long run. Then the government has also provided production linked incentive scheme for the extraction of such critical minerals, and for that purpose 100% FDI under automatic route has been provided. Then the government has launched National Critical Mineral Mission, which we were discussing, with an outlay of 16,300 crore rupees to actually fast track the regulatory approval process. The financial incentives will be given to private companies for both exploration and excavation to actually acquire critical mineral assets abroad, as we were trying with Zambia, but the talk has failed. To enhance trade with resource-rich countries, like for example, your lithium triangle countries, very important for this year prelims. Can anybody comment down which countries constitutes lithium triangle? To actually create mineral processing parks in our country as well as Center for Excellence of Critical Minerals. Also, in prelims they can ask you about the Mines and Minerals Act 2023, under which the private sector can now actually explore, excavate and use for industrial purposes 6 out of 12 atomic minerals. Prospective stage exploration has been allowed to them. It allows for drilling directly and subsurface excavation. A National Mineral Exploration Trust has been created, which will actually provide funding by the government for grade 4 to grade 1 exploration. Under single license now, you can actually end up clubbing various areas of potential reserves up to 1000 kilometers square. And the mine owners can actually sell 50% of their annual mineral, including coal, even in the open market. So keep these facts very dear to you for the prelims examination as well. Try to attempt this question and we move forward to the next news, where we are going to discuss the impact of the sanction which has been put by USA on the import of Russian oil. So what is the context of the news? The US has allowed the 1-month sanction waiver on buying Russian oil already on the water to expire now, and will not be extending it as per the US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. Keep this in mind. The sanction waiver for the Russian crude was first issued especially for our country, and then it was later extended to all the countries. This waiver allowed the countries to import for a month Russian crude in the context or in the backdrop of the kind of the conflict which started taking place between Iran and USA, and thus the kind of the blockades which were put on the Strait of Hormuz and Persian Gulf by the country Iran. Thus, USA was like, ठीक है, कोई बात नहीं, if you want, you have your oil needs, energy needs, you can basically import from Russia for 1 month and we will not put sanction on this import of oil. Now, let's try to first assess India's crude oil import dependency. For that purpose, we are basically going to refer an article of Indian Express which was published in the month of October 2025, according to which India is import dependent for 87.9%, almost 88% of our crude oil need. Like for example, one very simple argument which I keep on listening by various sections is that why we are not basically significantly increasing our LPG production in our country. Because even to make this liquefied petroleum gas, you basically require crude oil, right? You are basically going to take this crude oil and then you are basically going to compress it, and only then will be able to create a liquefied petroleum gas. And for 88% of our entire crude oil need, we are already import dependent. So even if you want to significantly, let's say for example, increase the production, you cannot do that because the raw material itself, for that purpose, you are import dependent for almost 242 metric million ton. Then our indigenous production capacity is only 2.3 million metric ton of crude oil, out of which what is the kind of contribution of the private sector? Meager 22%. as the public sector units itself provides for 78% of the total production. So if we refer to the oil cartel, that is your oil producing and exporting countries, 5.74 million barrels per day is the need of India. But keep this in mind that the entire oil which we are importing, we also export 64 million metric ton of that as refined petroleum products. So it is also important for the export sector of our country. Now what happened that when earlier USA basically started applying sanctions on the oil which we were purchasing from Iran, we basically started importing a significant share of our oil need or crude oil need from Russia. Now USA here is basically saying that see, the price of Russian oil is $482 per ton, right? But it contains higher sulfur content as per the Global Trade Research Institute. The Trump is saying, USA is saying that see, we are going to give you per ton crude oil at $523. Okay, that is fine. But what you do, you basically refine this petroleum product and you sell 64 million metric ton of it. Even if our price is higher, it is going to be costlier for you to purchase our oil, USA's oil. But what about the superior quality which we have? You can very easily refine it, increase your input cost for the refining, and that can significantly increase your export. So that will be a win-win situation for you. The average cost, right? If we are going to actually, kind of also integrate the superior quality of oil which USA is providing to us, the average cost would be around $498 per ton. But even then, it is actually a bit costlier than the oil which is being provided by Russia. However, keep this in mind that earlier Russia used to provide a discount of $16 per ton. Right now it is providing that. Earlier they were providing $40 per ton. So the discount provided by Russia on oil import has also significantly declined, if you guys can see. Why? Because they started realizing that how India is heavily import dependent for their oil. So just look at the top 5 oil importer which we have, from where we are actually importing oil from. 37% of our entire import of crude oil comes from Russia, 20% from Iraq, 13% from Saudi Arabia, 8% from UAE. And that's why USA is basically pressurizing us, putting sanctions on the import of Russian oil so that we buy more oil from USA because their share is only 3.2%. Keep this in mind that India and Russia, which are strategic partners also, we have set up a target that we are going to increase our bilateral trade to $100 billion by the year of 2030 and bilateral investments to $50 billion by 2025. Right now, in the year of 24-25, we had a kind of a bilateral trade of approximately $68 billion with Russia, and keep this in mind, 88% of that was nothing but the import of crude oil. Russia's share in our oil basket was meager 2% in 2020. In 2022, they were basically giving us this discounted price of $40 per ton. And now it increased to 37%, and just see how they basically kind of reduced the discounted amount as well. Realizing this, we had started already cutting Russian oil imports by 38% in the month of October 2025. Why? Because we were basically incurring a huge trade deficit with Russia. So $99 billion with China, but yes, most of them are critical minerals, irreplaceable, what we can do. But with Russia also, we were basically incurring a huge trade deficit of $61 billion. And thus, we were basically becoming overtly reliant on Russia for our energy security. At the same point of time, when our service sectors with companies like Tata and Infosys, when they were trying to, kind of infiltrate the Russian market, they actually face a lot of trade protectionism. Then the US's sanctions on the Russian crude oil supply, that is going to further increase the cost of Russian oil for us. Further, kind of the overflow or outflow of our important forex reserves will take place. That can have a BOP crisis. So we are required to look for alternative markets. More importantly, what was happening, there was also the issue with the payment mechanism. To understand that, we need to understand two accounts which are also important for your prelims examination, and that is Nostro and Vostro account. Nostro account, just imagine like this: our money on deposit at your bank. So the account which is held by our bank but in foreign currency at another bank, let's suppose in Russia. But let's say, for example, Russia and India said that, okay, we are basically going to kind of deviate from the dollar based trade. We will trade in rupee and ruble. Good initiative. Thus, Vostro accounts were created. Your money on deposit at our bank. So basically, it was an account which was held by a foreign bank in domestic currency at our bank. So what we started doing, we were basically paying them for oil and we were paying them in rupees. Now let's say for example, Russia has this surplus of rupee with them. But what they will do with that? Anyway, that if the total trade is $68 billion and 61 is import deficit, they are only procuring $7 billion of product from us. But they have a huge surplus of $61 billion. What they will do with that rupee? Correct? So thanks to this Vostro account, the payment mechanism also started facing the issue, and now we have reverted back to the dollar-based trade with Russia. So these are some important issues which started emerging with Russia. And thus, as our energy requirement is going to significantly increase. For example, as per International Energy Agency, our current energy requirement, whatever we have till now, it is going to be double by 2047. By the year of 2047, 25% of the total incremental global demand will come from one country, that is India. Currently, we are the third largest energy consumer and fourth largest LPG importer. Then, if you are saying that, okay, we are going to create non-farm jobs, for that purpose, 133 million plus people to its working age population. Further industrialization will take place. Further, the energy demand is going to rise. As well as we are saying that the non-fossil capacity, which was only 29%, 51% of that is already installed as a renewable energy, something which we also discussed when we were discussing the newly updated NDCs. So it is very important for us to actually focus on the renewable energy sector. International Solar Alliance, which we have been part of, Pradhan Mantri Surya Ghar Muft Bijli Yojana. Under your Shakti bill, we have decided to increase our nuclear power capacity tenfold by 2047. We are also envisaging to create 5 million metric ton of green hydrogen by 2030 under the Green Hydrogen Mission. We shall actually try to invest on this waste to energy initiatives like, for example, Govardhan. While other countries, for example, let's say in Japan, they are actually making such very important innovations like, for example, footstep power generation, which involves converting the kinetic energy from human footsteps into electricity. And these are something which kind of initiatives which we can adopt as well, right? So keep these suggestions in your mind and we move forward to the next news, where we'll try to cover a very important act which has been repeatedly in the news. First and foremost, what is the context? At the heart of this reform of the Delimitation Commission exercise which is being discussed in the parliament, right? A lot of shor sharaba is taking place. The heart of this reform lies the Nari, Shakti, Vandan Adhiniyam, which was passed in September 2023, where the government said that we are basically going to reserve 33% of the seats in the parliament for women and state assemblies, and that is going to come into force only after the delimitation exercise. The article today basically argues that this is not a procedural inconvenience, rather it is a constitutional safeguard which is built into the law itself. The logic itself flows directly from the articles of the Constitution, where as per Article 81 and Article 82, it requires that representation in the Lok Sabha shall be aligned as far as practicable with the population. Thus, to implement the principle of one person, one vote, one value, it is foundational, and without updated population data and a corresponding redrawing of the constituencies, any attempt to implement reservation will actually risk distorting this. If we look into your modern history section, you guys might have read about the various kind of educational initiatives which were done for the education of women from the people like, for example, Savitribai Phule, your John Drinkwater Bethune, who created the India's first college, Savitribai Phule, who created the India's first women's school. India's first women university was created by a person called as D.K. Karve. So a lot of educational reforms were taken place. That led to the political sensitization of women, leading to the creation of various political organizations. For example, Bharat Stri Mahamandal, which was created by a person called as Sarla Devi Chaudharani. Ultimately, in the Government of India Act 1990, it for the first time provided or left up to the provincial legislative assemblies of that point of a time that you people have complete freedom if you want to give the right to vote and right to get elected into the legislative assemblies to the women. The first presidency which actually provided for the women that they can actually get elected in the Legislative Assembly. That was Madras. And the first princely state was Travancore. Thus, the first woman to run for Legislative Council was Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay, and the first woman legislator who got elected was Muthu Lakshmi Reddy. Keep these facts very dear to you for the upcoming prelims examination. Now, let's have a look at the political participation of women in our country. And for that purpose, we can refer to the Global Gender Gap Index of 2025, in which our country was ranked 131st out of 148. A follow-up question can be, which particular organization released Global Gender Gap Index? According to which, our country's labor force participation was approximately 45%. The participation of female in the labor force. If let's say there were 100 women who were eligible to get job in workforce, 45 of them were eventually employed. Then we ended up closing almost 97% of the gender gap when it came to the pillar of educational attainment. Also, the female representation in the parliament. Now, this is where there was a dukti rag. For example, earlier in 2024, the total number of, let's say, parliamentarians are 100, almost 14.7 of them were women. But just a year down the line, in 2025, there were only 13.8% of the total member of parliament were actually women. Even the share of women in the ministerial roles significantly declined from 6.5% to 5.6% in 2025. So basically, let's say if there are 100 parliamentarians who are sitting in the Lok Sabha, only 13.8 or 14 of them are women. Is this number good if we compare it at international level? Let's try to see that. Country-wise data on women representation. Percent of elected women, 46% in Sweden, 38% in Australia, 38% in France, 40% in UK, 29% in USA and 16% in Pakistan and 20% in Bangladesh. So even Pakistan and Bangladesh have more number of female members in their parliament in comparison to us. Also, in Pakistan and Bangladesh, why such high number exists? Because they have a specific quota for them, right? Then why there is such high participation in these countries? Because they have a quota in the political parties that the contestant will basically kind of appoint to fight the election. At least certain number of candidates will be women only. That's why such high percentage has been achieved. Following this global model, our government basically brought 106th Constitutional Amendment Act or Nari, Shakti, Vandan, Adhiniyam, according to which our government basically ended up reserving 1/3 of seats in Lok Sabha, state legislative assemblies as well as Union Territory of Delhi. This reservation will also apply to the seats reserved for SC and ST women within the seats which are reserved for SC and ST quota. Under the Act, it was said that this particular reservation will come into effect after the census, which will be conducted after the commencement of the bill. So now the census is being conducted 2027, right? According to which there will be a delimitation exercise which will take place, according to which the seats will be reserved for the women, and that's why the delimitation commission has been appointed by the government and all that is in the news. Remember, the reservation was provided for 15 years after the act. So already 18th Lok Sabha election has been conducted after the passing of the act. So that is gone. Census will take place in 2027, will be completed. Then delimitation will take place. After that, for 19th Lok Sabha and 20th Lok Sabha, the women will have a reservation of 33% of the seats in Lok Sabha. And the seats reserved will be rotated after each delimitation as determined by the parliament. If you would have remembered just these 3 or 4 simple points, now try to attempt this prelims 2024 question and we move forward to the next news, where we'll quickly try to learn about a very important article which has been in the news today, right? And that is Article 25 and Article 26 of the Constitution in context with the Sabarimala Temple entry case. What is the context of the news? A 9-judge constitution bench of the Supreme Court, led by the Chief Justice of India, Suryakant, is currently hearing the petitions related to discrimination against the women at religious places and is also examining the correctness and a broader constitutional implication of its own 2018 ruling in Indian Young Lawyers Association versus State of Kerala on the issue of women's entry into the Sabarimala Temple in the Kerala. So what was the landmark judgment, Sabarimala judgment? On September 2018, the Supreme Court basically struck down the age-based restriction declaring the Rule 3 Clause B of Kerala's Hindu Place of Public Worship Rule 1965, which permitted religious denomination to exclude women from public place of worship on the grounds of the customs which are being followed from generation after generation. Take what was the interpretation which was taken by the Supreme Court? Supreme Court said that see, Article 25 to Article 28 basically provides for right to freedom of religion, in which your Article 25 specifically deals with the freedom of conscience, where an individual has freedom to profess, propagate and practice their choice of religion. ठीक, जो भी पूजा पाठ आपको करना है, आप कर सकते हैं. That is a complete freedom to you. You can practice it, profess it and propagate it. ठीक है, state cannot intervene into that. Then comes Article 26. It protects the autonomy of religious denomination to actually manage their own affair. Both this Article 25 and 26 are subject to three specific grounds under which they can be curtailed if they are violating public order, if they are basically kind of disrupting the morality which exists, as well as if there is any issues related to health concerns. Article 25 also permits the state to regulate any economic, political or secular activity of such religious denomination. And the state can actually provide, remember, state can provide for social welfare and reform and throw open the Hindu religious institutions to all classes and the section of Hindus. So this was specifically added, why? Because of earlier, you guys can recall like how, for example, the Ijawas in the Kerala considered to be untouchable. So they were not allowed to actually enter into the Travancore temple, right? Vaikom temple. So there was a Vaikom temple satyagraha, right? Led by people like Mahadevan, K. Kelappan, etc. K. Kelappan, who is also considered as the Gandhi of Kerala. Or for example, even our father of Indian constitution, B.R. Ambedkar, he also agitated for the right of Mahar class to actually enter into the Kalaram temple. Mahar class, which was basically considered as untouchable, to which B.R. Ambedkar originally belonged to. That's why this specific article was added. So when it comes to kind of identifying that what practices can be considered to be essential practices to any religion, and that is something in which state cannot intervene, right, or shall not disrupt. There has been various important judgments of the Supreme Court along with Sabarimala judgment. First was Shirur Mutt case, which basically establishes a very important doctrine called as essential religious practices doctrine. It says that the religion include practices which are essential to faith while distinguishing them from the other secular activities. The court shall assess with religious texts and tenets that whether such a practice is integral to faith or not. Now, how to decide? Let's say, for example, there is a religious denomination and that is saying that no, it is indeed our integral faith. How we will actually assess that yes, indeed this particular organization can be considered as a religious denomination? So for that purpose, there was a three-part test which was devised under Shirur Mutt case. The court will assess whether the member of organizations share a common faith, a common organization and designation by a distinct name. Then in Acharya Jagdishwar Anand case, court said that the court shall maintain a healthy balance between the religious autonomy which they can practice under Article 25 and 26, as well as while practicing these kind of faith and practices, the religious denomination have a responsibility that they shall not violate the constitutional accountability. In Adi Shaiv Shiv Charyargal 2015 case, Supreme Court held that even if there is a proof of certain practices which are being followed in the pre-constitutional time, it cannot afford protection or have a blanket ban protection under Article 25 if that practice is not essential to the core function of religion. And that was the case which was taken by the Supreme Court in the Sabarimala judgment as well, where it allowed that even, let's say, for example, those women who are going under the menstrual cycle, they can also basically access the Sabarimala temple. But what has been the government's argument? Let's try to assess that as well, to see both the side of the coin. First is that the constitutional morality is inherently subjective and not independent ground of judicial review. That was the argument given by the Solicitor General of India. Under Article 25 Clause 2, the power of social reform lies with whom? With the state, not with the court, right? Thus, court retain authority to intervene only where the religious practices either offend public order or disrupt health and morality. Now, remember this term very importantly for your prelims examination, something which is called as transformative constitutionalism. So, whenever, let's say for example, court, judiciary, it interprets certain articles of the constitution and then basically, kind of intervenes in reforms which shall be propagated among the society, it basically violates the law making kind of power which has actually been enshrined on the parliament and not the judiciary. So whenever court just goes overboard by taking an interpretation of an article and then kind of setting up a directive which will be eventually implemented by the state is termed as transformative constitutionalism, where the government also argued, Solicitor General of India also argued, that judiciary is ill-equipped to determine such essential religious practices as constitution leaves the question of determination of such essential religious practices to the faith itself and not to the judiciary. So keep these arguments very dear to you in your mind and we move forward to the next news. Whereas the European Union is planning to include 180 more products under the scope of its carbon border adjustment mechanism, a move that can actually significantly increase the carbon tax cost on Indian manufactured exports to Europe. Keep this in mind. If we talk about in the terms of export, Europe is the largest export trade destination for our country and thus it is of paramount importance. Now, our products, which are high in quality, they are cheap also in comparison to the kind of the input cost which is there in Europe, the labor cost which is there, the various labor rights which are there. So in comparison to that, obviously our products are cheaper, but also contains very good quality. So our products are basically infiltrating the markets of Europe. Obviously that is kind of preventing large scale industrialization in Europe. Europe's countries thus is kind of trying to implement trade protectionism in the region, right? So in this context, let's try to understand first, what is this carbon border adjustment mechanism? Let's say that there is a EU manufacturer whose name is TO. TO is a company which basically creates ship and for that purpose, it basically requires steel. But if such steel production is taking place in Europe, it is obviously going to generate carbon dioxide. If such large scale carbon emission is taking place in Europe, it will end up violating the Fit for 55 pledge which has taken by the European Union. Remember this for prelims, where European Union is saying that we are going to cut down carbon dioxide emission by 55% by 2030. From what level? From the level of 1990s carbon dioxide emission to achieve our Paris Agreement target. Thus, what this company, EU manufacturer TO does, it basically moves this carbon intensive production to a Indian company, let's say Tata. Now here in India, there is a less stringent climate policy, right? There is no nationwide carbon tax which is being applied on the production of steel by Tata. Thus, Tata used to basically, kind of produce this steel and this steel was actually imported back. This carbon dioxide intense steel was actually imported back to European Union by this manufacturing company TO. Is this clear? But now under the carbon border adjustment mechanism, what European Union is saying that you are basically importing this carbon intensive steel from outside country, from countries which are having less stringent climate policy. Thus you are required to have carbon certificates and these carbon certificates will be paid by this importing company, that is TO. Take. So European companies are required to pay for the carbon dioxide emission under their emission trading scheme. CBAM imposes the similar cost on the foreign producer. The calculation is approximately 80 euro per ton of CO2 carbon tax which will be paid at home. In India, we do not pay any such taxes. So now the EU buyer is saying that, see, Tata, obviously I want to buy the steel from you, but I will have to pay this 80 euro per ton of steel which I am procuring from you, right? Or if let's say for production of 1 ton of steel, if there is a 1 ton of carbon dioxide emission, then I am required to pay 80 euro for that, right? It is going to be very costlier for me. If you want, you can actually end up paying that. Either you lower the price of your steel to cover the CBM cost, or you pay for this carbon certificate which I am required to pay here. Don't you think what will be the impact on the Indian seller? They will earn less, tougher contracts, we will lose our bargaining power. Is this clear? Till now, various sectors were covered: steel, aluminium, cement, fertilizer, electricity, hydrogen. Now it is further being increased to 180 more product. How it is going to significantly impact India's trade interest? Look at the data here. 22% of our total merchandise exports goes to European Union. 25% of total export products to EU fall under the CBAM bracket right now. In fiscal year 2025 itself, there was a 24% decline in our steel and aluminium exports thanks to the discussion of carbon border adjustment mechanism. 1 ton of steel using coal actually kind of releases 2.4 ton of carbon dioxide. So this sale which we were having, and let's say for example, if the Indian buyers start paying for the carbon certificate tax, which these European importers have to pay there, it is going to actually have a kind of a marginal loss on profit of 16 to 22%. Less trade will take place, less export will take place. It will significantly impact our target of becoming a $2 trillion export economy by 2030. Less demand of Indian product, less incentivization for the industries to produce in India, less job creation. Don't you think it is going to significantly impact our overall economic growth as well? Trade protectionism being applied by the developing countries to curtail the products from the developing nation. Keep this in your mind and we move forward to the next news, where we are going to read about the first ever assessment of bat conservation flags, which actually threat to species and the data dark spots. What is the context of the news? The bat species in India, which are around 135. So India is home to 135 bat species, which belongs to 9 families. Keep this in mind. They are facing neglect due to lack of research and are also under threat from urbanization, deforestation, land use changes, and climate impacts. The first ever national assessment, State of India's Bat, done by Nature Conservation Foundation, has released that. The report has pointed a sobering status of the flying mammals, calling for urgent research on their habitats, hotspots, ecology, diet, and the disease risk which they pose. Keep this in mind that out of this 135 species which are found in India, 16 of them are endemic, and thus they are only found in our country. The highest number of bat species are found in the region of West Bengal, closely followed by Meghalaya. Meghalaya, which has got these large-scale cave structures, right? And thus they act as a kind of an ideal home for this bat. The second largest cave structure in our country, that is Kremlia Prah, lies where? In Meghalaya. A follow-up question to all of you. Where does in our country exist the largest cave structure? One of the most frequently seen bat, even by you, would be the fruit bat, which you guys might have seen, right, in the gardens, in the forest. This Indian fruit bat, which is also the largest bat species in our country, is termed as Indian flying fox, which has been listed as a near threatened on the IUCN list. Keep this in mind. And in the Schedule 2 of the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972, where they are actually designated as vermins. But keep this in mind that even as a vermins, they majorly rely on, kind of consuming the fruits. You guys can see these bats drinking nectar here, the flying fox. Many of the people have this negative connotation where the bats are actually considered as the carrier of disease, a kind of a myth which was also spread during the time period of pandemic. So look at this report itself, which has been published, your State of India Bat report. It contains this infographic where it shows that these fruit bats, flying fox, right, termed as Chiku, plays a major role in regenerating forest by actually dispersing seeds and pollinating trees. Or for example, some insect bats who specializes in the pest control. So they also play a very important role in the healthy ecosystem of flora and fauna in our country. This was the question which appeared in your 2024 paper, where it was said that how they have been placed under the vermin category. Yes, absolutely, the statement is correct. Not because they feed on the blood of the other animals. As we can see, they largely feed on the fruits, and that's why they are also called as Indian fruit bat, right? So the first statement was correct and the second statement was incorrect. So keep these facts in your mind. This is the entire list of the species of bats in our country which has been listed on the IUCN list. Majorly 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7. The 7 species which basically have been listed in the IUCN list. Just remember the name of them. And with this, we have reached to the end of our discussion today. Do not forget to attempt the questions at the end of the video and test your knowledge. We will meet in a very interesting discussion very soon. Till then, all the very best for your preparation and thank you.